Hello, ladies and gentlemen. When I think about the future, I try to focus not just on what's happening today, but on what today makes possible tomorrow. We often overestimate what we can achieve in a year and underestimate what we can change in a decade. This is especially true when it comes to peace. Right now, the world is watching the conflict between Ukraine and Russia with fear, frustration, and in many cases, fatigue. It's easy to fall into the mindset that this is just another chapter in an endless cycle of violence. But that would be a mistake. A peaceful future is not only possible, it's within reach. The real question is, what are we doing right now to make it happen? Peace is often misunderstood as the absence of war or conflict. But in reality, it's much more complex and much more fragile. It's not something that simply happens when fighting stops. It's something that has to be designed, invested in, and sustained over time. And that requires long-term thinking. Real peace is a system, not a moment. It's the outcome of choices made steadily over years. Choices that may not grab headlines, may not show immediate results, but ultimately shape the kind of world we live in. One of the biggest mistakes we make is treating peace like a switch. We think that if we negotiate a deal, hold an election, or sign an agreement, peace will naturally follow. But history shows us otherwise. When conflicts end without addressing the root causes, inequality, mistrust, broken institutions, misinformation, and economic desperation, what we get isn't peace. We get a pause, and that pause is fragile. It can shatter with the next political crisis or economic downturn. Sustainable peace requires more than a treaty. It requires a foundation built on opportunity, stability, and shared understanding. Long-term thinking forces us to go beyond the immediate. It pushes us to look at education systems, healthcare infrastructure, food security, digital access, and how information spreads in a society. These may seem unrelated to peace at first glance, but they are at its core. A population that is educated, healthy, and economically secure is far less likely to fall into division or conflict. A society where institutions are trusted and where people feel their voices matter is less vulnerable to extremism or violence. Short-term reactions, by contrast, often revolve around managing the optics or suppressing a problem just long enough to avoid crisis. They might calm things down temporarily, but they usually do little to prevent recurrence. Think about how many conflicts around the world seem to reappear every few years in different forms. That's the cost of short-term thinking. It's a kind of maintenance without progress. Technology and innovation can help shift this dynamic. If used wisely, they allow us to anticipate problems before they escalate. Data analytics, for example, can track food insecurity trends and help prevent famine, a factor that has historically triggered unrest. Artificial intelligence can help governments respond more quickly to emerging threats without overreacting. Digital infrastructure can support transparency and civic engagement, making it harder for misinformation to take root and divide people. But even these tools don't produce peace on their own. They must be embedded in a larger strategy of long-term investment. Another key aspect of long-term thinking is humility. The problems that fuel conflict are rarely solved overnight. Progress is often incremental, and the work is sometimes invisible. That can be frustrating, but impatience is a dangerous force when dealing with fragile systems. We have to be willing to put in effort that might not pay off for years, maybe even decades, because the alternative is far worse. When we neglect peace building because it's slow or politically inconvenient, we end up paying far more later in the form of displacement, instability, and human suffering. It's also important to recognize that long Term peace doesn't just happen at the level of governments or international organizations. It happens in communities, in classrooms, clinics, homes, and workplaces. Every act that fosters dignity and fairness contributes to peace in some form. Every investment in a young person's education, every effort to improve health care access, every initiative that brings people from different backgrounds together, that's long-term thinking in action. There's a quiet strength in choosing long-term peace over short-term wins. It's not always popular. It may not always be visible, but it's the kind of strength that reshapes history in the most meaningful way. What we build today, not just in policy, but in systems, mindsets, and values, will determine how resilient our societies are tomorrow. The future doesn't reward quick fixes. It rewards patience, discipline, and a commitment to solving root problems. Peace, like progress, is cumulative. Every step we take in the right direction, no matter how small, adds up over time. And if we're willing to prioritize long-term thinking over short-term relief, we give ourselves a much better chance of creating a world that isn't just free of conflict, but full of possibility. There was a time when problems in one part of the world felt distant. Borders acted as buffers, and many believed that what happened elsewhere had little to do with their daily lives. That time is over. Today, we live in a world so interconnected economically, technologically, environmentally, that instability in one region sends ripples across the globe. A disruption in one place affects supply chains in another. A conflict thousands of miles away can impact food prices, energy access, and security concerns everywhere else. We're more connected than we've ever been, and that comes with both opportunity and responsibility. Consider what happens when conflict erupts in a region that plays a major role in agriculture. It's not just a local tragedy, it's a global concern. When access to grain, fertilizer, or key commodities is disrupted, prices rise around the world. Vulnerable populations in entirely different countries may face shortages or hunger, not because of their own policies, but because of instability somewhere else. That's not a theory. We've seen it happen in real time. The consequences of conflict rarely respect borders. Energy is another example. A single conflict can upend global energy markets. Prices spike, and countries that depend heavily on imports are left scrambling. This affects not just governments but households. Families trying to heat their homes or fuel their vehicles face immediate economic strain. Industries slow down, jobs are lost, stability erodes. And in some places, those stresses can lead to new unrest, creating a feedback loop that is difficult to break. This interconnectedness also applies to cybersecurity and information. A cyber attack launched in one part of the world can take down systems in another. A misinformation campaign started in one language can spread across platforms, influencing people who have no direct link to the original conflict. Our digital infrastructure is shared in ways we're still learning to understand, and that means disruption anywhere carries the potential to harm people everywhere. But the impacts of instability aren't only economic or digital. They're deeply human. When people flee violence, they seek refuge. They cross borders, often under desperate conditions. That movement affects neighboring countries, and sometimes countries far beyond. It challenges infrastructure, public services, and social cohesion in places that may already be under strain, and it creates a moral imperative for the world to respond, not just with compassion, but with coordination. This doesn't mean we need to be fearful of connection. In fact, it's the opposite. Being interconnected is what makes progress scalable. It's how we've been able to share knowledge, fight disease, and lift millions out of poverty. But it also means we can't afford to treat any part of the world as isolated. Instability is not a local issue anymore, it's global by default. What that demands from us is a shift in mindset. We have to stop thinking in terms of their problem and our problem. We have to start asking how global challenges can be addressed collaboratively, with shared investment and shared benefit. It means supporting peace and development efforts even in places we may never visit, because the return on that investment is stability and security for all. We also need to build more resilient systems, supply chains that can adapt, energy networks that are more decentralized, healthcare systems that are globally informed but locally strong. These systems should be designed not just for efficiency, but for endurance. They need to be able to withstand shocks and bounce back stronger, because instability is not going away. It's part of the world we live in, and our job is to be better prepared for it. Ultimately, understanding the deep connection between global instability and local impact isn't just an academic exercise. It's a prerequisite for smart decision making. Whether we're talking about public policy, international aid, innovation, or education, the solutions we build should be grounded in the reality that what affects one affects many. When a society breaks down, it doesn't just collapse inward, it sends shockwaves outward. The world isn't getting smaller, but it is getting more linked. The sooner we accept that, the better we can respond, not just to crises, but to the opportunity to shape a world where peace and stability are not just ideals, but achievable outcomes. Not because we hoped for them, but because we understood how deeply we all depend on them. Rebuilding is usually thought of as something that happens after the dust settles, when the fighting stops, when the treaties are signed, when people finally return home. But that approach waits too long. The truth is, rebuilding has to begin much earlier, not in concrete and steel, but in planning, in preparation, in laying the intellectual and institutional groundwork for what comes next. Because if we wait until the war is officially over, we risk stepping into a vacuum that can become just as destructive as the conflict itself. There's often a narrow window between the end of violence and the beginning of lasting peace. It's a fragile time filled with uncertainty and competing interests. If there's no plan in place by the time peace arrives, chaos can take over. People need to know where they will live, how they will eat, where their children will go to school, and whether there will be any opportunity to build a better future. Those answers can't be improvised at the last minute. They have to be developed while the conflict is still unfolding, even if it's uncomfortable to do so. One of the most important things to rebuild early is trust. That's not something you can pour like cement or schedule like a construction project. It's intangible, but without it, nothing else holds. Rebuilding trust in institutions, in law, in leadership, in each other. That work begins before the fighting ends. It happens through consistent messaging, clear plans, and the presence of systems that show people their future is being considered. Every time a displaced child gets access to education, every time a clinic continues to operate, every time an independent court rules fairly during conflict, it's a signal that rebuilding has already started, even if the guns haven't gone silent. Economic systems also need to be part of early rebuilding. War destroys not just buildings, but livelihoods. People who have lost everything can't wait years for the economy to catch up. They need pathways to contribute and rebuild their own lives. That might mean investing in local agriculture, small businesses, or temporary jobs programs. It might mean ensuring that digital infrastructure is in place so people can connect, learn, and earn, even during conflict. These are not luxuries, they are lifelines. They prevent frustration from turning into unrest. They keep hope alive when people need it most. Rebuilding also means having a vision for what kind of country or community or region will emerge from the conflict. Without that vision, rebuilding can just reinforce old divisions, but if the work starts early, it becomes possible to imagine something better, something more inclusive, more sustainable, more resilient. That's when post-war reconstruction becomes not just repair, but transformation. And the earlier that vision takes root, the more people will believe it's possible and work toward it. Technology has a major role to play in this early rebuilding. We have tools now that allow us to map damage in real time, to coordinate humanitarian aid more efficiently, to ensure transparency in how resources are distributed. These tools can build accountability into the process from the start. They can also help prioritize which areas need help first and which efforts will have the greatest long-term impact. But the key is to deploy them early, not as an afterthought. Education is another area that can't wait. If an entire generation grows up without access to learning during conflict, the consequences are felt for decades. Early rebuilding means keeping education systems running in whatever form possible, even if it's remote learning, even if it's in makeshift classrooms. Those systems don't just teach math or reading, they provide structure, stability, and a sense of progress for communities under pressure. They tell young people, your future still matters. There's a strong tendency in times of conflict to focus exclusively on the urgent. And while urgency is real, it's also dangerous when it crowds out planning. The most successful recoveries in history didn't start the day after the war ended. They started quietly in parallel, with people thinking ahead, making notes, drafting frameworks, listening to communities, and shaping strategies for what would follow. That's the kind of foresight that reduces suffering and speeds recovery. Rebuilding isn't something we do after peace is achieved. It's part of the process of getting there. It begins with the belief that tomorrow can be better, and that belief has to be supported by tangible action today. Whether it's rebuilding trust, services, education, or opportunity, the earlier the effort starts, the stronger the foundation becomes. And when peace does come, those foundations are what allow a society not just to survive, but to thrive. When people talk about peace and stability, they often focus on politics, treaties, and diplomacy. These are essential, but there's another dimension that is sometimes underestimated: technology and the sharing of knowledge. In a world where divisions run deep and trust is fragile, the ability to spread useful information and tools across borders has the power to bridge gaps in ways that traditional negotiations sometimes cannot. It's not a replacement for diplomacy. It's a parallel force, one that can quietly build understanding and interdependence where there was once only separation. Technology is neutral by itself. It doesn't come with moral direction. But how it's applied, who it reaches, what it solves, and how widely it's shared determines its impact. When technology is made accessible and inclusive, it opens doors. It makes it possible for students in rural communities to access the same materials as those in cities. It allows farmers in different countries to learn from each other's successes. It empowers healthcare workers to diagnose and treat conditions more effectively, even in remote or underserved areas. All of these applications do more than just improve lives, they build connections. They create a shared experience of progress. One of the most powerful things about knowledge is that it's not diminished when shared. In fact, the opposite is true. The more people who understand a concept, the more refined and useful that concept becomes. When countries or communities are isolated, whether by conflict, geography, or policy, they miss out on the collective intelligence that the rest of the world benefits from. But when knowledge flows freely, it becomes a bridge. It allows people on opposite sides of a divide to solve common problems together, whether it's managing water resources, improving food security, or combating disease outbreaks. Even in areas with a history of division or distrust, shared knowledge can serve as a neutral starting point. Scientists collaborating on climate models, engineers working on energy solutions, developers building apps that respond to local needs. These kinds of partnerships often succeed because they're rooted in solving real problems, not just navigating political ideology. And in the process, they foster relationships that can help soften divisions over time. Trust doesn't have to begin with big gestures. It can grow through consistent cooperation on small but meaningful challenges. Technology also enables empathy. It sounds counterintuitive because we often hear about how screens and algorithms can divide us, and that's true when they're misused. But when applied intentionally, technology can help people see into each other's world. A documentary shared online, a live conversation between classrooms in different countries, a virtual platform where displaced communities can tell their stories in their own voices. These aren't just digital experiences. They're moments of connection that challenge stereotypes and deepen understanding. In places recovering from conflict, access to the right technologies can dramatically accelerate rebuilding. Think of satellite data helping cities plan new infrastructure, or mobile payment systems allowing people to rebuild their livelihoods even before physical banks reopen, or translation tools that help former adversaries begin to work side by side. These solutions don't erase the past, but they make the future more manageable. And when that technology is shared across communities and borders, it strengthens the social fabric as well, but access matters. The benefits of technology and knowledge sharing are only real when they're equitably distributed. That means investing in digital infrastructure, ensuring people have the skills to use tools effectively, and creating environments where open exchange of ideas is encouraged rather than feared. It also means protecting the integrity of that information, because misinformation can destroy trust just as quickly as knowledge can build it. The beauty of this approach is that it doesn't rely on everyone agreeing about everything. It starts with identifying shared needs and building solutions together. That's how bridges are built, not through abstract ideals, but through practical, repeated collaboration. And every successful collaboration plants a seed for peace. It shows that cooperation is not only possible but productive. It turns adversaries into co-creators, even if only for a moment. Technology and knowledge sharing won't solve every problem, and they're not substitutes for justice, accountability, or leadership. But they're among the most scalable, repeatable tools we have for narrowing divides. Because when people build together, when they learn from each other, solve problems side by side, and see their lives improved by collaboration, it becomes harder to sustain the narratives that drive conflict. And in that shift, there's the beginning of something more powerful than division, mutual benefit. That's where lasting peace starts to take root. The choices we make today, both as individuals and as nations, will echo far into the future. It's tempting to think that only grand gestures or historic decisions shape the course of history, but in reality, it's the steady accumulation of decisions, values, and actions, large and small, that determine whether the world becomes more stable or more fragile. The trajectory of peace, prosperity, and resilience depends on what we prioritize now. Right now, many societies are standing at a crossroads. The consequences of conflict, climate change, inequality, and misinformation are no longer abstract threats. They're visible, measurable, and immediate, but that doesn't mean we're helpless. It means we're in a moment where our choices matter more than ever. Whether we invest in cooperation or competition, in dialogue or isolation, in rebuilding or revenge, those decisions will ripple outward for decades, shaping not just what the world looks like tomorrow, but what kind of world future generations will inherit. Nations are often judged by their strategic decisions, but just as important are the moral decisions they make. Do they invest in peace building when there's no political incentive to do so? Do they extend help to struggling neighbors not because they have to, but because it's the right thing to do? These choices don't always offer short-term rewards. In fact, they often require patience, humility, and long-term thinking. But they lay the foundation for a kind of stability that isn't imposed, it's earned. The same principle applies to individuals. People sometimes underestimate their role in shaping global outcomes. But each decision to engage, to learn, to understand rather than judge, contributes to the overall tone of a society. Every time someone votes for leaders who promote stability and unity, supports local initiatives that reduce polarization, or shares credible information instead of fueling outrage, they're participating in the creation of a more stable world. These may not feel like world-changing actions in the moment, but collectively they add up. Education is one of the most powerful tools for long-term stability. What young people learn today will influence how they lead, govern, and relate to one another tomorrow. When education systems focus on critical thinking, empathy, and problem solving, they create citizens who are less vulnerable to manipulation and more inclined to build solutions. Investing in that kind of education is one of the clearest ways to strengthen the future. It's not glamorous, it doesn't produce immediate headlines, but it's deeply strategic. Technology, too, plays a central role. How it's developed, who has access to it, and what values are built into its design will help shape the global balance of power and influence. Will technology be used to connect and uplift, or to control and divide? That decision isn't inevitable. It's being made every day by engineers, regulators, users, and companies. And it matters just as much as any diplomatic summit or policy agreement. The environment is another area where today's decisions will have an outsized impact on stability. Climate change doesn't just threaten ecosystems. It threatens economies, health systems, and food security. It creates stress that can lead to migration, conflict, and systemic breakdown. So when individuals reduce their carbon footprint or support policies that prioritize sustainability, and when nations commit to renewable energy and climate resilience, they're not just protecting the planet. They're investing in global stability. But perhaps the most overlooked choice of all is how we treat each other across borders, across cultures, across ideologies. Stability isn't just about strong institutions or smart policies. It's about relationships. It's about whether people believe that cooperation is possible, that compromise is worthwhile, that progress is shared, and that belief is built through countless small choices, to listen, to forgive, to work together even when it's hard. We can't predict the future, but we can shape it. The world we leave behind, stable or unstable, connected or divided, hopeful or fearful, will be the result of what we prioritize today, and every person, every nation has a role to play. Not by waiting for perfect conditions, but by choosing consistently to move toward peace, understanding, and resilience. The path isn't always clear, but what's certain is this: the future is watching. And it will be built on the decisions we make right now. The path to peace isn't paved overnight, but every step toward it matters. A phone call, a policy, a donation, a new technology, a new mindset. It's not about grand gestures. It's about consistent, thoughtful action taken by people who believe that peace is not only possible, it's necessary. Because in the end, peace isn't a gift we wait for. It's a future we build, and if we build it wisely, patiently, and with purpose, starting now, it will be a future worth living in. Thank you.